Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be going through my favourite and most disappointing books of the year so far, so kind of like a quarterly wrap up. I decided to stop doing monthly wrap-ups towards the end of last year because I wasn't really enjoying doing them, and I decided that life is too short to film videos that you're not 100% excited about. But the benefit to doing quarterly wrap-ups is that, so there's 10 books on my list that I'm going to talk about today, and I am excited to talk about every single one of these books, either because I gave them 4 or 5 stars, or because I didn't really like them. And I don't know, I just find it easier to talk about a book if I had strong feelings about it either way. So hopefully that's okay. Hopefully you enjoy this wrap up, and I'm going to stop rambling and just get into talking about the books because I don't want this video to take too long. I'm still recovering from COVID at the moment, so if my voice sounds a little bit croaky at any point, then that is why. I've also realised that there's actually a really wide range of genres on this list, because my favourite book that I've read so far this year was actually a science fiction, which I don't read that often, and it was also actually, ironically, one of the first books that I read in 2022, and that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I read The Martian by Andy Weir a few years ago and loved it, and I was really excited to read this. I think it came out last year, and I saw quite a lot of people talking about it at the time, and then I noticed it was in a 99p Kindle deal, so I decided to pick it up while it was on offer, and oh my goodness, I loved this book. So this is about a guy who wakes up on this spaceship with no memory of how he got there, and then through flashbacks you do start to learn how he came to be on this spaceship. This is one of those books where I don't want to say much on the plot because I feel like I enjoyed it so much more because I didn't really know a lot about it going into it. Let's just say that the character development throughout this book was incredible. This book got very emotional in places, and I loved the way that I felt like I was inside the mind of the main character, and I was experiencing all of the ups and downs and just everything that was happening. I felt like I was in space, which was really, really cool. I also really appreciated the way that Andy Weir explained all of the science within the book because it made sense to me, and I am not a scientist. I would be really interested actually to hear from actual scientists on how accurate the science is within this book, but it all felt logical to me, and so I felt like even when some parts got a little bit technical, I was still following everything. Every time I see someone reading this, I feel excited on their behalf because I know what they're about to experience, and I wish I could read this book again for the first time. I think I will reread it at some point. I think I mentioned that I read this on my Kindle, but I have also heard amazing things about the audiobook, so I would like to give that a try at some point. These aren't in any particular order, by the way, but the next book that I'm going to talk about on my list is Elantris by Sanderson. So I do actually have a spoiler-free reading vlog if you wanted to hear my full thoughts on this. I'll leave it linked down below just in case you haven't seen it yet, but this is a standalone fantasy that is set in a world where you have this city called Elantris, and basically there's something called the Shayard, which affects people at random, and it used to be that these people would be turned into demigods and they would go and live in the city of Elantris where people would kind of worship them. However, something happened to the magic in this world about 10 years ago, I think it was, that means that now instead of being transformed into demigods, anyone who's affected by the Shayard is turned into a kind of zombie. It's basically like this plague. So I've been gradually working my way through all of the books within the Cosmere, starting with the Mistborn trilogy, which I think is still probably my favourite of the books that I've read by Sanderson so far, but this is a close second. I really enjoyed this. I really loved the politics and also the atmosphere, especially the atmosphere within the city of Elantris. Sanderson has this very easy breezy writing style, so even though this is quite a long book, it didn't feel long. It felt like the right length, considering that this is a standalone and you still need to fit in all of the world building and the development of the magic system. I will say that the magic system in this felt quite different to the other Brandon Sanderson books that I've read. There's a lot of mystery throughout this book where you're obviously trying to work out what's going to happen next, but you're also learning about what happened to Elantris and what happened to the magic in this world. And I did think that the ending was a little bit rushed. That's why I gave this 4.5 rather than the full 5 stars. But I did think that overall, the way that things were wrapped up, it did still feel satisfying. I think if you are looking to get into Brandon Sanderson, then I would still recommend the Mistborn trilogy. But if you're looking for a book that's less commitment, then I think that this could also be a good place to start because it is a standalone. And I think this was also the first book that he actually published. While we're on the subject of fantasy, I did also quickly want to mention Jade War by Fonda Lee, which is the second book in the Greenbone saga. I technically finished this in April, but I started it in March, and so I did want to count it within this wrap up. I won't talk about this too much because I do have a spoiler-filled reading vlog, hopefully coming soon, which will have my full thoughts, but let's just say that I loved this book, and I think if you like the idea of a fantasy series that has a lot of family drama and that has a lot of politics, then I would really recommend this series. Jade City was one of my favourite fantasy books of 2021, and I don't want this series to end. I'm actually terrified of finishing Jade Legacy because I feel so attached to these characters and I don't want anything bad to happen to them, but I think that that is just wishful thinking. The atmosphere in this world is just incredible, and you know when you're reading a series and you feel kind of sad because you know that you're never going to be able to experience it again for the first time. That is how I feel about the Greenbone saga. It's amazing. I love it, and I love these editions as well. These are the special editions from Illumicrate, which have the most beautiful stenciled edges, and so whenever I look at these books on my bookshelf, it just makes me happy. Next I'm going to move on to my favourite romance of the year so far, which is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. So this is an adult sapphic romance that follows our main character, Delilah Green, who grew up in a small town, but she now lives in New York and works as a photographer. Her dad passed away when she was quite young, and she was raised by her stepmom, who she never really got along with, and so she tries to avoid going home as much as possible if she can help it. At the start of the book, you learn that Delilah's stepsister Astrid is about to get married, and Delilah has been hired to be the photographer, and so she travels back home to her hometown, and not long after she arrives, she runs into Claire, who is one of Astrid's best friends. Obviously this is a romance, and so you can probably guess what happens and what direction it goes in, but there's also this side plot where Claire and her other friend don't like Astrid's fiance, and so they're trying to work out how to stop Astrid from going ahead with the wedding. I loved the characters in this book, but especially Delilah, who is just so funny, and it's this very dry, sarcastic kind of humour, which I love. I really appreciate in general complex sister dynamics, and Astrid and Delilah definitely had that, and you could see that throughout the book. You could see why they are the way that they are. The romance itself was definitely a slower burn, but I actually preferred that, and I thought that there was a good amount of steam in contrast to the plot, so the plot was well developed with the romance. Next on my list is The Mothers by Brit Bennett. So this is literary fiction that's set within a black community in Southern California, and there's a few different characters that you follow, but one of the main perspectives is a girl called Nadia who has a relationship at the start of this book with the son of the church pastor, and she gets pregnant and decides to have an abortion. So you follow Nadia and Luke, who's the pastor's son, but also Nadia's friend Aubrey, and it was a really interesting book actually because I didn't feel like this was either pro or anti-abortion. It basically just shows you how this abortion affects affects these characters, and it was a really interesting look at the way that our choices can impact on the rest of our lives. The mothers, as in the title, basically refers to the older women who attend this church, and every so often there are parts that are narrated by them where they give their perspective on the events that happened, and I thought that that was a really interesting way of structuring the story. I didn't love this quite as much as The Vanishing Half, but I did think that it was very beautifully written. If Brit Bennett releases any other books, then I will definitely be interested in reading them because her writing style just works for me. Next on my list is The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah, which is historical fiction that's set during the 1930s, during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl era. It follows a woman called Elsa who lives in Texas, and she is part of this farming community that relies on the land to survive. However, it hasn't rained in months, and so Elsa is faced with this really difficult decision on whether to wait it out and see if things get better, or travel across the country with her family to try and find a better life. The characters go through a lot of hardship in this book. It's very character driven and it's very harrowing at times, very emotional, but I did think that that was captured well. It focuses a lot on the relationship between Elsa and her daughter, who is quite fiery and rebellious and doesn't always understand the decisions that her mom is making. I don't read a lot of historical fiction, but I think that if it is a genre that you're interested in, then I would recommend Kristin Hannah's books. I've only read The Four Winds and The Nightingale, but I enjoyed both of them, and I think that her writing style is very easy to breeze through, and I definitely want to read more of her books. I didn't love The Four Winds as much as The Nightingale, but I still gave it 4 stars, and I would recommend it, especially if you're looking for historical fiction that's set outside of the World Wars, because I feel like a lot of historical fiction does focus on World War II in particular, and this is obviously set during 1930s America, which is a time period that I honestly didn't know much about. So I did enjoy that this felt unique in that sense. Finally, I'm going to talk about my favourite thriller of the year so far, which is Truth Be Told by Kia Abdullah. So this is technically the second book in a series, and you could start with this book because you're following the same main character, but it's a different case that she's working on. However, I would say that annoyingly, this book does spoil the outcome of the first book, so just something to bear in mind if you are interested in this series. In this book, we're following our main character Zara, who used to be a lawyer, but she now works for an organisation that supports people who have been sexually assaulted. The other main character that you follow is a boy called Cameron, and he goes to this all-boys private boarding school in London, and at the start of the book there's this party where he gets very, very drunk and he's assaulted by one of the other students. There's a lot of nuance to this story, which I did think was handled well. I would recommend checking the trigger warnings beforehand because obviously there are quite a lot. You can kind of gather that, I think, from the synopsis. Both of the main characters in this book are Muslim, and obviously I can't speak on the representation, so I would recommend checking out Own Voices reviews. I actually listened to the audiobook for this because it's available on Scribd, and I would recommend it. I thought that it was well narrated. I had no idea what was going to happen next as I was reading this book, and it kept me wanting to carry on reading. Obviously, I think if you like the idea of a thriller like that, where it feels very unpredictable and where there's lots of twists that you won't see come in, then I would recommend this one. Okay, so next I'm going to move on to some disappointments of the year so far, starting with Her Perfect Twin by Sarah Bonner. So this is a thriller about a woman who suspects that her husband is having an affair with her twin sister, and so she goes to confront her sister and ends up killing her, and she decides that the only way to get away with murder is to start impersonating her twin and take on her identity. I thought that this was going to feel more like a crime thriller, but instead it was more of a domestic thriller, which is fine. It's just that domestic thrillers aren't my favourite type of thriller. The beginning felt very jarring because it really throws you straight into the story, and I struggled to really understand the character's motivations and why the main character was doing what she was doing. I felt like I was just having to roll with things and just accept that the main character had killed her sister and this is what we're doing now, and it did feel a little bit messy. This is a lockdown thriller, by the way. I think that is mentioned on the blurb, so it's not a spoiler. The main issue that I had with this book was that there was a lot of gaslighting and emotional abuse, and I understood why it was there. It was just not nice to read about, and so even though it did have some very clever and interesting twists, I gave this one 2 stars, unfortunately. It does actually have a quite high average rating on Goodreads, and so it might just be a me thing, but yeah, I didn't like this one, unfortunately. Another thriller that I also did not enjoy was Final Girls by Riley Sager. So this is about a woman called Quincy who, when she was in college, she went away with friends to this cabin in the woods, and there was this massacre and she was the only survivor. The press have shown a lot of interest in Quincy and they've labelled her as a final girl. So final girls are basically when you're watching a horror movie and you get to the end and there's one girl that's left over that survives. That's the concept behind final girls, and there are 3 final girls within this book: Quincy, Lisa and Samantha. And Lisa dies at the start of the book, supposedly by suicide, but there are some suspicions around whether that's what actually happened. Sam then arrives on Quincy's doorstep saying that they should support each other because they're the only person that knows what the other person is going through, even though they've never actually met in person before. And the story kind of goes from there, but it's really hard to talk about the plot for this book because nothing really happens. Or nothing really happens at the start of the book. Obviously stuff does happen towards the end, but that was my main problem with this book, is that it was just kind of boring. I predicted some of the twists, but even the twists that I didn't predict, I wasn't that shocked or surprised at. Some of the twists actually made me feel really, really angry, and there were some parts of this book that made me feel really, really icky, and not in a good way. The choices that the characters made in this book made me roll my eyes because they just didn't feel realistic, and I ended up feeling really, really frustrated. So yeah, I gave it 2 stars overall, and to be honest, I think I was being generous. Will I keep reading books by Riley Sager though? That is the question. Honestly, yeah, I probably will. I think he has another one coming out this year, which I will still read because I did enjoy Lock Every Door and Home Before Dark by him. This one just wasn't my favourite. The final book on my list, which was more of a disappointment than a book that I actually hated, because I still gave this one 3 stars, but that was One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serle. I think the main reason that this book was disappointing to me was because I really loved In 5 Years by Rebecca Serle. I think it was one of my favourite books of 2020. This basically follows a woman called Katie whose mom has recently passed away, and before her mom passed away they were planning to go on this trip together to Italy because her mom went there when she was younger and really, really loved it and had always wanted to go back there. Katie decides to go ahead with the trip anyway, and not long after she arrives, she actually runs into her mom, but her mom from 30 years ago. So she sees it as this opportunity to get to know this younger version of her mom, and she finds that the version of her mom that she remembers doesn't quite match up with this version of her mom that she's met. It's very character driven, and you do see Katie's grief and how she's trying to come to terms with losing her mom because they were really, really close, more like best friends than mother and daughter. The setting in this book was my favourite thing about it because it did make me feel like I'd been transported to Italy. The main issue that I had was that I didn't feel a lot of emotion from the characters, and I did not like the way that Katie treated her husband in this book. I would still read other books by this author. This was quite a quick read. I think I read it in like 1 or 2 sit-ins. It just was a little bit disappointing considering how much I loved In 5 Years. But yeah, that does bring me to the end of the video, so thanks thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Let me know your favourite book of the year so far and your least favourite book of the year so far. And yeah, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and click subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye!